What's up, world? This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000, back again with another edition of Book Club with Tommy D. What's going on, big bro? How are you?
Pretty good this morning. How you doing, bro?
I am well. I am well. And man, I don't know if you can tell, but Tommy got me jazzed up this morning talking about the work we're going to look at today. So I'm really excited. I appreciate you again giving me the opportunity to do this.
Uh,
Well, it's been a little while since we got to get back together, just because of some other obligations. You mentioned last time what we were getting into, and we decided to really switch up our genres of literature, where we've been in the novel and kind of hanging out in kind of maybe modern classics or contemporary classics or whatever you like to call those works. I guess we'd have to get a good lit major to kind of break down the errors of literature for us. But we really switched gears in looking at Henry David Thoreau, and kind of getting into some of his essays. And it's a different form, right? We've got art, and art has all kind of forms, and so it's just a different exploration of a form, which is pretty cool to me. Um, so, like I said, Henry David Thoreau, man, to me, is like a household name, or a really classic American name that probably every American should know. Maybe that's not true, but he was considered a naturalist and an essayist. But man, he was really so much more than just that: an intellectual, an activist, an educator, and an artist when it came down to it. He was born July 12th, 1817. So, just celebrated his birthday a couple weeks ago. Died at 45, May 6th, 1862, from tuberculosis, wasn't it?
yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. Yeah. So, getting into this work, and probably his most famous work, is Walden and Civil Disobedience. It's a collection of essays, kind of centered around, um, really centered around his activism, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so, give us a little background of what I mean by that.
So he uses these texts to kind of vocalize his protest and describe his demonstration that he decided to undertake in his protest to things going on with the American government at the time, specifically uh, taxation and the what the tax funds were going towards. He was against a permanent standing military, and he was against the idea of America going to war in Mexico to spread slavery to even further reaches. He was an abolitionist, among many other things. So he had a firm stance against slavery and did not support the war.
Yeah, and man, just a really cool dude, and kind of coming up in this time, early, 19th century
Mm.
Concord, New England, really raised up around a lot of forward thinking, kind of middle class Americans. And when we talk about transcendentalism, that is really like an American philosophy that kind of comes through this development of this kind of progressive middle class in New England. And it's really interesting, kind of the people that he grows up around, and some of the strong women that were in his life that helped kind of influence his maybe social and political ideas. Um, but yeah, you really said it. Like, both of these works in the end is a demonstration of protest against a government that would enslave people and go to war to take over more land. So he's really, anti-imperialism, right? Anti-colonialization, and all these things that we kind of hear buzzwords now, right?
Right.
Um, he was really early in on that stuff.
Conscientious objection. People might be more familiar with that. We had a local guy famous for that. They made a movie about him. Desmond Doss, I want to say, Hacksaw Ridge. You know the film I'm
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about?
right.
Conscientious objector. He didn't
Yeah.
believe in killing people in this warfare for the government's sake. That was an idea that maybe not originated with Thoreau, but he put it onto a formal platform to share with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and that's what he does. He uses his
Mhm.
platform and kind of this experience that he creates to protest against the taxation that's funding
Right.
this war, right? And really gets into even indicting the self or the self, the individual, and saying that if an individual supports it in any way, they are just as guilty of it, right?
Mm.
If my tax dollars are going to support wars that I don't agree with all over the world, sound familiar? I'm just as guilty of those wars
Yeah.
as the people that kind of got it started, and really inspiring in that way. Um, so let's talk about it. Did you have any kind of preconceived notions going into this thing about who Henry David Thoreau was, what this idea of transcendentalism is, and maybe even like what an essay is supposed to be like?
I heard his name a few times, of course, growing up in school and things like that, but it wasn't something that made a great impression on me then. I didn't take as deep a look as I have now. So it was fairly new information, I guess, if you want to call it that. Although the ideals that he presents in the literature, things that we've seen and talked about many times throughout our lives. Um, as far as an essay, I guess it was a little different than what I expected from an essay when we're talking about like civil disobedience, particularly because it's not just a presentation of information, but it's more like a call to action. When he wrote it to inspire people to do something, not just to tell them about something. And I guess that's where the surprise, I guess, or it's where I wasn't really expecting it to take such a strong direction there, but it was insightful, and that's an understatement.
Yeah, it seemed like it was maybe even a little bit inspiring for you. I mean,
Yeah.
it's certainly inspiring for me every time I read it. But we looked at civil disobedience and we talked about it, and it was like, well, hey, let's go read Walden,
Hmm.
right? So that kind of struck out to me that the writing and the message was enough to say, hey, let's go look at this longer piece and even this more complicated piece as well, right?
Right. And not just to go and look at his other work, but also just from reading Civil Disobedience to start with. And we're talking like 20 pages, depending on what format you have it in. It's not a really long piece, but just from reading that where we started, it was inspirational enough for me to say, man, I need to read this every year. Like I need to own a copy of this and Walden and read them regularly. And I think it'd be a benefit for a lot more people to take advantage of the library and educate themselves with these works too.
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. I keep a copy around and I try to review it at least once a year. And then there's some times where I'll be thinking about something and have to go back to them. And that's pretty cool too when somebody creates any kind of work that is withstanding like that, right? It withstands the test of time and the different cultural context and all those things, and it still holds validity and still holds true. Um, yeah, that's pretty cool. So we did kind of do it backwards in how we read it, where we read civil disobedience first, and then we said, no, let's go back and let's take a little bit closer look. And so looking at Walden, Walden really is a description and an account of this demonstration that we speak of, right? And he uses the first couple or three chapters to kind of set up this maybe thesis that we're saying. And really what he's getting at is we don't need all that maybe society tells us we need. For him, it was you don't need the big farm because then you just own a mortgage on the farm and you've got to pay it all the time and you've got to your product doesn't go to you, it goes to the corporation, which is a bigger part of the system, which is funding this war and doing all these evil things. And so it's really him doing this demonstration of how we can be self-reliant, right? That's another good transcendentalist term out there. But he gets into so much more than just this political or social experiment, right? And there's just so much in Walden that it's difficult to describe in this short period. So I really just want to know, what is your response to it? How do you feel? And it's been a while since we've read it now, but
Yeah.
what is your response to the work?
Well, automatically after reading it, it makes me think about one of the biggest things, my biggest takeaways, it makes me think about waste because it's something that he focused on quite a bit. You know, we don't have to produce so much, which we're encouraged to do that in this like a consumerism with the in the economy. You know, you have to produce more goods, consume more goods, and all this. And he just really dialed that all the way back, just to consume as little as possible and live as simply as possible. And it really seemed to improve his quality of life. You know, people work hard to gain all these possessions, to have all these luxuries and all these things. And to achieve that, to support that, you have to work hard. You have to keep working hard. You know, you have to earn or gain wealth to provide these things for yourself and for a family. Whereas he was doing that without any luxuries. And a lot of things he's referring to as luxuries we think of as necessities. And that's very telling as far as how society's changed. But
Sugar.
yeah, coffee and tea, you know, butter. Those are luxuries. He lived without those. And because he didn't need the luxuries, he didn't have to work as hard to afford them. And because he didn't have to work as hard, he didn't have to eat as heavy. And because he didn't have to eat as much, he didn't need as much money or crops and all that stuff. It was easy for him to be self-sufficient during his experiment or his demonstration he was doing out around Walden Pond. Living in the woods for a couple years basically is what he did.
Yeah, and it's very what I find interesting in it is that it's almost these what we would call these existentialist observations that he makes, right? This absurdity in society and the waste in society. And it's the same thing that, Kierkegaard is thinking about over in Europe around the same time, but it's this very American setting, like you say, being in the woods, right,
Right.
and stuff like that, and even 100 years after Thoreau, we've got these other existentialists, the French intellectuals, that are really starting to put together these same ideas that you just said, right, that he was working on. In the 1800s, 1840 something or something, whatever it was when
Yeah.
he wrote this, So it's just really the forward thinking and the progressive mind that he's displaying in what you're describing, in the kind of the philosophical realm, right?
Hmm.
And then he turns around and he does the same thing from an environmentalist perspective, right? And
Yeah.
he describes nature and the interactions of nature very vividly. right? And kind of talks about these ideas of what we would understand as, you know, ecology and environmental history. And he kind of displays those things before they're really a formal discipline or before those ideas or techniques are formalized. Um, and it's interesting because we talked about it a lot in doing that, um, because he kind of lacks this prior language or this prior discipline to work within. He gets very artistic in his language about nature and the interactions of nature, right?
He does. And
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet that any environmentalist, serious environmentalist that you've ever heard of, that famous for doing these different studies and experiments and things over the last couple hundred years, they probably have a copy of this on their bookshelf at home.
Oh, I'm certain, and probably some of his other works too, where he because he did some other things where he described species more scientifically. So yeah, I'm sure of that too. Um, and so he goes through this experience and describes all these things that he's observing and kind of that he's feeling. Um, and you can really get lost in any piece of it, but he still brings it back to his demonstration, we're calling it, right? And these observations of excess and waste and the absurdity, and it all comes back to that, to what the point is for Thoreau.
Found myself wondering at times when he's on some of those different points. As I'm reading, I start to wonder: is he talking about animals in nature right now, or is he talking about men in society? I don't mean just men and women, but people in society.
Yeah.
There's a lot of deeper things going on than what you might get just skimming it at surface level.
Yeah, and what's really beautiful about Thoreau is that he's doing all of those things at the same time, isn't he?
Hmm.
And using really this artistic language mixed with this intellectual academic references, more classical Greek references that I can keep up with, and intertwining that with Eastern philosophies and Enlightenment thinking and still a pushback of humanism. He really does all those things at the same time. Um, and honestly, sometimes that can be overwhelming for me. And
Well, I'd say for anybody, and that's why we took so much time reading it.
yes, yes, and you kind of keep on saying how you can't just skim over it, right? It is
No,
you're going to miss it if you do, right?
absolutely.
Man, and so we could spend a whole lot longer just on Walden. Um, but what else? What else do we need to add for this session about Walden before we kind of move into civil disobedience?
Think that the highlights are definitely his views on the environment and the interaction there, and also the simple living. Um, I think we touched on those pretty good. What else do you think?
Well, I think if we just generalize it, and we've been doing that anyways,
Yeah,
but Walden is really the reflection on self, the individual reflecting on the individual and their interaction with the environment. And if we could put it in a nutshell, that's kind of what Walden is. And then civil disobedience becomes that interaction with society and government. And what's the individual role and responsibility in society and government, right?
it's just on men leading by their morals instead of what you feel is right. You have inside you the ability to determine right from wrong, and you should govern yourself by that. And the whole country and the world will be a better place if that was the case.
Yeah, and so, but he goes through this whole thing with that and into the reason for government. And it's kind of the
Mhm.
same thing we've talked about that, Locke had done previously, and then, Machiavelli before that, and other folks who have looked at and kind of studied government up until that point. And it's like there is a reason for social organization and government, right? And it is not to necessarily control people's morals, right?
Mhm.
Um, the individual, the self, should be able, to if you mind your own. Really, it comes down. This kind of goes to the Greeks a little bit. Just mind your own business, right? If everybody just minded their business,
Mhm.
right, it
Right.
would take away from a lot of these things. But he goes through that and sets up the reason for government, and then he starts describing how really gets in the way. Government gets in the way of itself, and
Yeah, of
what
it,
it's
right, of its original purpose at least, yeah. And a
yeah,
lot of times it's in because the government has become focused on financial gain more than anything else.
and not only financial gain, but the financial gain of a few wealthy,
Right.
while kind of the everyday at this point farmer
Hmm.
does a lot of work to create the wealthy's product, right?
Right.
Sounds a lot like conversations that are had today,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Um, and man, there's so many quotables, but I said I wanted to get this in here, and you really set it up as far as the individual knowing what right and wrong. And one of the most inspiring things he says in there is, let us be men first before subjects, right? And that is not, and probably when I was younger, more than anything, I took it in a very, you know, rodacious way or whatever, and hoorah and all that type vibe. But what he's really saying is put a check on yourself.
Yeah.
Listen to your conscience. Listen to God. Listen to the universe. You know what I'm saying?
Be a
Um,
righteous and just individual first.
right, right. And it's very much like the ancient Greeks, like being virtuous, right? And those ideas of
Hmm.
virtue. Um, And what is so cool about Thoreau is that he doesn't just talk it, right? And he describes an actual true event that happens in his life where he refuses to pay, I believe it was the poll tax.
We tax something like that. The tax man's coming around to collect.
And due to that, he was jailed,
Hmm.
and his whole thing was, I am not going to pay a tax to support a government that that estouts liberty
Hmm.
but is founded on the enslavement of others. And
And
furthermore, wants to expand that to
right.
other regions.
Because of his resistance and refusal to pay the tax, of course, he was jailed. But to his point, and what he says in the writing, of course, they couldn't have jailed me if you didn't pay the tax. If my neighbors didn't all pay, if nobody paid it, they couldn't take me to jail.
They couldn't jail us all, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can just imagine the kind of people who probably took that as great inspiration for political campaigns that came on over the last 150 years or so
Oh yeah, and so
around the world, as far as that goes. Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. This was a great inspirational text to him.
Malcolm X,
Yeah. So
Leo
if you're interested
Tolstoy.
in any of those type of characters and what they went through, you should probably start with reading Civil Disobedience and to give you a good background into their mindset.
Yeah, and man, that's another thing I just really wanted to highlight is, you know, his influence on modern culture and modern society and how we deal with this. And it was the Russian oligarch and great author Leo Tolstoy, who is known for, kind of selling his possessions to take care of the peasants on his land and kind of really changing his ideas about the Russian aristocracy. Like you said, Gandhi's revolution was inspired by Thoreau's civil disobedience. And Dr. King followed suit. He was inspired by Gandhi and Thoreau as well. And that's the model we use today. If we want to demonstrate against a law, we go and break that law in a nonviolent fashion and allow ourselves to be arrested or
Yeah.
treated any
Peaceful
kind of way.
demonstration.
Yeah. And then when you get out, you go and break the law again. Right? That's
Right.
what the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville was about, right? That's what the bus, you know what I'm saying? The bus issue, the busing issues, and all those other kind of issues in the what we think about in the civil rights era. They were following Thoreau's model, right?
Right.
Um, and I think that's overall. If we're going to put civil disobedience in a nutshell, I think there it is, right?
Yeah.
He created a manual for exactly what it's called, civil disobedience, right?
Yeah. And like you said earlier, he highlights the individual's responsibility in how society functions, and your role as far as interacting with the government and their peers around you, your neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Man, it's pretty cool stuff. I really
definitely.
encourage everybody to go not only read it, but like you say, take your time to digest it. Think
Yeah.
about what he's really saying and what it says to you. Um, I think it's safe to say we were both kind of inspired by this guy a little
Mhm.
bit, right?
Yeah,
And it
definitely.
fits right in with uh, Farewell to Hills and the removal of the Native Americans, the particularly the Eastern Cherokee Nation in Farewell to Hills. But during Walden, Thoreau makes comments of the New England tribes that were pushed out in the 17th century, 17th and 18th century, 100 years before he's writing this. So um, I think it's a very important piece of American literature. I mean, it obviously has its international um, impact, right? We just talked about it, right? But I think it's a really important piece for Americans, and it should really be studied more in American history and American lit because it shapes almost everything going forward. And these, from conservative ideas to progressive ideas, sovereign citizens to communal socialists, all are going to pull something from Thoreau. Yeah. And that's pretty damn cool to me, right?
Yeah, it's almost a couple hundred years old, still that relevant to this day. I mean, everything that we talked about in our private discussions about it is what he was writing about in that era is still super relevant today. I mean, maybe more than ever, if that's possible.
Yeah. And,
Just as much, at least.
we did talk about it a lot, and it's a check on me. And am I
Hmm.
really living up to the values that I say I hold? You know, and if
Right.
Thoreau is the benchmark, I fall short. You know what I mean?
No, what was it he was saying about the vote? Voting is important, but taking action behind the votes that you cast, and living in a way that supports the ideas that you're trying to elect leaders to present to the rest of your society. That's taking the action is much more than just voting. You have to live like you believe what you're voting in. That's the important part. And one of
Yeah.
my favorite quotes now, and it was right in the beginning, and you gave probably one of not the best one already, but the government that governs best is the government that governs the
Governs
least.
least. Yeah. Hey, man, you just hit one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yes.
that's a good one.
Yeah. All right, man, that's pretty awesome, man. And look, I don't want to sit here and just start chasing rabbits down holes. I
Be
mean,
easy to do.
we will talk all day about this stuff. Um, but man, really important piece of literature, really important individual, and really part of a very important broader movement in transcendentalism, and something that I would enjoy to look into more with you, as far as looking at Emerson and looking at Whitman and looking at some of these other folks, and some of
Yeah.
that you know American philosophy and American philosophers. Uh, well, shoot, what else, big bro? Before we wrap this thing up.
I think that pretty much covers it for me. I mean, did you have anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, man, I can't say enough, really, how much this has impacted me in my life, and just like other things, reading it at different stages. I remember being a child and reading Walden, and like we said earlier, I mean, there's so much language and so much work in there, you can get lost in it. But then there's all these little sound bites, right? We're grabbing these sound bites for folks, and I remember reading. I think it's like in the sixth or seventh paragraph in the opening chapter. It might be in the second chapter. But I went to the woods to live deliberately. You know what I mean? And like, as a young child who enjoyed being in nature, and really not under, because you're young, you only know what you've had experience, not knowing as much as I know now. It was just like wanting to go and find out, wanting to go and experience it and reflect on it, so that I can kind of design my life deliberately, right? To be a man, not a subject, you know. And it's just very inspiring. It's inspired me my entire life, and still does. I mean, I read it, read it with you, and it's like, man, how did I miss this all
Hmm.
these times? You know, so it's a really good piece, really good important piece of literature, a really important kind of American philosopher, I guess, for sure. Sure. All right, well, we're going to leave it right there. When we get back together, we're going to look at Hemingway again, correct?
What was the next one that we said we were going to do? Is it oh, The Sun Also Rises.
The sun also rises. That's what we got
Yeah,
on
yeah.
deck, right?
That's right.
All right, and that's another cool work too. But shifting genres, shifting back to
Right.
the
Back to the
novel.
novel.
Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. All right, bro. I really appreciate you once again. This has been Book Club with Tommy D, Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.